I'm Bryan Ward, and this is my true ghost story. Well, where I grew up, there was an abandoned school. It had been abandoned for about 10 years. And the children in the neighborhood would go up there at night and, have parties and start fires. And some of the older children would go there to make out, teenagers in the way they are. But one time, my friend and I were up there. It was a late evening, it was dark, and I think a storm was rolling in. It was a typical, creepy afternoon, late evening, and we were probably late for dinner. And there was a room in the school that had been locked off. It's where they drug all the old equipment and put it in there. And the door had been busted through. And it was a hole that you could look through. And we heard something coming from that room. And we made our way there. We got down on our knees and we looked through the hole. And there was an old player piano up against the wall, covered in dust. And the room itself was very creepy, especially for young kids. And the player piano started playing, and in the dust you could see a little boy sitting at the piano playing the piano.
Pause it there.
In the neighborhood that I grew up in, there was an old abandoned school. It had been abandoned for about 10 or 15 years, and a lot of it had been caved in and it was desolate. But a lot of the children in the neighborhood would go up and play there in the day, or and the older kids would go there at night to make out. And one evening, it was sort of late in the evening, we were probably late for dinner as it was. Friends of mine and I were up there, and there had been a room in the school where they had drug a lot of the old equipment, and it had been sealed off. And I remember someone had knocked a hole in the door. It wasn't a big hole, it was probably 5 or 6 inches around, and it was just enough that you could get down on your knees and look into the room. And I remember the light from outside as the fading sun was setting was coming in through the windows, and you could see that all the equipment in the room, and there was an old player piano directly across from the door. And as we watched, the dust was flying through the air, and it was very creepy to begin with. The piano started playing by itself, and in the swirling dust of the room, you could make out the form of a young boy playing the piano. And that was just about enough for us. That was a little bit too much, and I remember my friends grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me out of there, and we probably stumbled and tried to make our way out and ran home. So that was my true ghost story. I'll never forget what happened next. There was a little boy appeared at the piano, and you could see right through him. I mean, he was definitely a ghost. We were convinced. My friends wanted to get out of there, so they grabbed my shirt, I remember this, and screamed at me to get the hell out of there. And as soon as he said that, the little boy at the piano turned and looked directly at me, I mean, right into my eyes. And it was as if my soul had been ripped out of my heart and my chest, and I'm sure I don't still have it today, but it was the scariest moment in my life. The little boy came right at the door, and my friends and I ran, but the door was pushed down on top of us, and my friend was trapped under the door. And I did everything I could to get him out of there, but that little boy had grabbed him by the foot and was dragging him back into the room. And I ran. I hate to admit it today, and it's something that I've had to live with my entire life, but his screams fueled I fled. I ran, and it wasn't long of running down the hill before his screams stopped. And I made it home, and I never said a word to my parents about it, but that night, as we all lay down to sleep, I could hear that piano playing, and that song, which I could never get out of my head, played from outside on our porch. And my parents woke up, they could hear it, and the little boy was knocking at the door. So every night, for weeks, that damn song would play, and it would wake us up in the middle of the night, and there'd be scratching at the door and knocks on the windows, and my parents were freaking out, and we didn't know what to do. But we did have our own piano in the home, and that song that I heard, and we heard every night, was ringing in my head, and But the thing about it, after you've heard it about 15 million times, is that it never finished. And so what we started doing at night was, before he showed up, we would start playing that song, and we would play it all the way through. And after a few nights of this, we noticed that the ghost would start playing his song along with us. And after 3 or 4 nights of that, he finally finished the song, and he never came back. And I think today, when I think back on it, that's all he needed, was to learn the last part of that song and get the rest he needed. Well, we put a search party together, obviously. Everyone in the neighborhood, his parents were beside themselves. And the sheriff came, and everyone volunteered, and we looked far and wide, but no trace of Timmy was ever found. And to this day, no one's quite sure what happened to him.
Okay, what happened to Timmy?
What happened to Timmy? Well, it's a sad story. Timmy was found the following morning, quivering in the woods, and no one could get a straight sentence out of him about what had happened to him. And, he was a bright kid and full of promise. It was a good friend of mine, but he was just never the same after that night. I see him every once in a while, and I try to do what I can for him, but he lives in a trailer, and he never really amounted to much. I think he's considering a run for Congress, and if he does, I think he'll make it.